thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's a pleasure to come and talk to you, and thanks for coming. You know, the 5:30 slot, you're in a wonderful city and you're sort of thinking, I've had a long day, perhaps it's time to go and enjoy the city or go and have a rest before enjoying the city, and you've made it here. So thank you for coming along. The talk that I'm talking about today, the slides for the talk are on my website, tclacademic.org. Click on Huw Jarvis, scroll down to presentations, and you'll be able to access the slides. As some of you know, I've been tweeting frantically all day, as you have, and if you're not on Twitter, it's probably too late to plug that one at this point. I'm going to talk about digital residence, and English as an L2, what it means and why it matters, and I'm going to sort of draw on some of the work that I've done in this area, and also talk about what that means in practice. The work that I've done on this area, again, most of the articles that I refer to are open access. I'm really keen to publish in open access channels. I want to bring down paywalls. I don't think anyone owns knowledge. I think we should be sharing knowledge, and I would always rather publish in a journal which is open access than one which is closed access. Sorry if there are publishers who disagree with that, but most of what I talk about, the theory stuff, is available to download. It's not really a theoretical discussion. I want to link implications of research for practice, and I want to talk very much about what this means in practice. So, by way of introduction, education in a changing environment. I've been working in education technology for 30 years. My first experience of it was in Kuwait. I'd been a teacher for 2 years in Sudan before that, in the early 80s. In Sudan, education technology was having electricity, which being able to tell, we didn't have electricity. And then I went to Kuwait, and it was, as you know, a wealthy country, and I worked at a language centre which was incredibly well resourced, and we had 4 computers in the self-study centre. The only access that I had to computers, the only access that students had to computers, was once a week when we went into the self-access centre and 4 people sat around the computer and worked on a sort of fairly mechanical hangman type game, gap fill type game. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And it was inherently motivating. And you said to the students, today we're going to do computers. Yes, teacher, yes, computers. Those days have long since gone, of course, 30 years ago. Jump forward, and I've written about that in the EL Gazette, if anyone's interested, quite recently. Jump forward 15 years ago, the University of Salford, where I work, invested very heavily in a language resource centre. And we deliver languages courses to international students, EFL, ESL, whatever you want to call it, courses. And we deliver, at that time, we delivered languages courses, modern foreign European languages, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Arabic, and Chinese. And we invested loads of money in this language resource centre. As I wandered around and looked at what people were doing, I started to notice something of a difference between the practices of modern foreign language students and the practices of EFL students. Modern foreign languages students were going into the resource centre and working on fairly dedicated language learning programs. Software programs specifically aimed at language teaching and learning. EFL students, in contrast, they were doing that, but they were also spending time on the internet. They were doing Hotmail stuff. They were doing a wider range of things. And I started to get curious about what students were doing with technology and what it means to them. And that has sort of preoccupied my work for many, many years. Because the argument I want to put to you is that in an era of the internationalization and the globalization of language, in EFL and in ELT, it's no longer enough to just focus on that narrow tutorial capacity of computer software. An argument which I'm going to develop. So, I'm going to talk about some of my recent studies, which got me kind of curious about this phenomena, and then talk about the implications for us in English language teaching. In terms of specific practice, I want to look at an example model lesson where we contrast traditional CAL or MAL and PPP and contrast it with an alternative which I characterize as task-based teaching and learning and mobile-assisted language use. And then I will want to talk more broadly about why I think these things really matter. So we're living in a period of phenomenal change, I think. And that change creates challenges and opportunities for us. But I think it does require some rethinking of old ideas about the role of technology in language education. So today is really about this, isn't it? The mobile phone. It's with us all the time, isn't it? We're online, and actually it's really about using real mobile phones and social media in particular. And it's really about that because if we think about these areas and we think about our students and we think about what our students are doing in English outside of our controlled classroom contexts, these things are major players, and the English language is a major, major player. So let's just have a quick show of hands. It's maybe actually not hands. It's getting late. Everyone stand up, please. And I'm going to put this the other way around. If you're not on Facebook, sit down. Okay? If you interact on Facebook in anything other than your first language, sit down. So, to change the question, do you use Facebook in more than one language? Stay standing. Everyone sit down, that's it, they're sitting up. It's the end of the session, it's always good to get people moving. So, how many of you watch YouTube videos? Okay. How many of you watch YouTube videos in a second language? That's pretty good. Okay, how many native speakers of English? I'm looking at one or two of you. Watch YouTube videos in anything other than a second language? In any other language, apart from English? Okay. How many of you access the internet in a language other than your first language? Okay. How many of you blog in a second language? Fewer. A lot fewer.
We're behind.
Yeah. Somebody's given me the answer. In many ways, I think we are behind our students.
We're blogging here.
You're blogging there, okay. And it's not your first language, so you're blogging in English. You're breaking the rules. There aren't that many that do it. The point being, I think, that many of our students are doing all of these things in both their first language and in English as a second language. Okay? And I think that creates, or potentially creates, new frameworks for understanding our field, for describing our field, for investigating our field, but also for thinking about practice and what practice means. So, the challenges for ELT, I think it's really about this. It's about non-native speakers interacting in both their first language and their second language as digital residents. Digital residents is a term coined by White and Corner, and it kind of replaces this rather discredited notion from Prensky of the digital native. Yeah. The digital native is dead. I mean, if the digital native was ever alive, it was perhaps useful a number of years ago when my generation was struggling to get to grips with technology, and the younger generation, my kids, were doing it really, really well. I mean, I think today most people accept that the idea of digital native is dead, not least because our generation can do some things just as well, if not better, than the younger generation with technology. If I think about technology and English for academic purposes, I'm better at accessing academic information in my discipline area, I'm better at referencing information, I'm better at doing a whole load of things than the younger generation. So that idea of digital native is somewhat discredited now. But the digital resident is somebody who lives out part of their life in an online environment. They are pretty much online most of the time. And White and Cornu contrast it with the digital visitor. The digital visitor is somebody who turns their laptop on, does what they have to do, closes their laptop, shuts it all down, and then gets on with the rest of their life. How many of you are online now? Okay, majority of us are digital residents. The idea of the network self is the idea part of who and what we are is expressed through our digital interactions. We share information on Facebook, we tweet stuff, we put stuff on Instagram, and part of who we are is out there. I know stuff about people that I didn't know because I hadn't even met them face to face. I knew I'm a Leeds fan. And one of Leeds' biggest enemies is Chelsea. The second biggest enemy after Manchester United. Unfortunately, two of the most successful clubs, unlike Leeds United, but there we go. And I knew stuff about Russell without ever having met him. You probably know something about me if you follow me on Twitter. And if you follow me on Twitter in an unacademic sense, if you follow Huw Jarvis, you'll know my politics, you'll know my sport, you'll know a whole load of stuff. Pegram coins the term, I link, therefore I am, which I think is an interesting way of putting it. And I think that this whole idea has massive implications. I think it's a game changer for our profession. And it's preoccupied me, and it's preoccupied my work for sort of the last 5 years or so. And that's the background to me wanting to find out more from our students about what these ideas mean to them. And I wanted very much to bring the student voice into the research. It seems to me a lot of the studies on traditional computer-assisted language learning and mobile-assisted language learning are rather sort of traditional empirical studies of measuring the effectiveness of using this software to develop vocabulary compared to other techniques. That's not kind of the stuff that I was interested in. I just wanted to find out what students were doing, what it meant to them, and how it worked. And my ideas were based on Kern, who I guess many of you will have heard of. The complexity of the issues involved in technology and language learning is pushing us to understand the effectiveness in terms of the specifics of what people do with computers, how they do it, and what it means to them. That was my research stance in going forward, and it has been over the last 5 or 6 years. And to do that, I've gathered data from a whole range of participants. I got a British Council funding project, the English Language Teaching Research Awards, to go and talk to students at a foundation year students, they're all adult students I should say, foundation year students at a university in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, Zayed University. And I went and talked to them, and I was surveyed what they were up to with technology, and in the Thai university. Since then, I went to look at international students in the UK, because I started to think, are there going to be any differences in terms of perception between people who have access to English everywhere, not just in the classroom, i.e. international students studying in the UK, they access English around them, they're in the shops, they're socialising, vis-a-vis students who have more limited access to English, other than through the classroom and through mobile and computer devices. So they were my participants. In total, the stuff that I'm going to report has surveyed something like 250 over 2 or 3 studies. And my research methodology in trying to find out what people were doing with technology, what it means to them, I wanted to gather some statistical data, because I thought it's important to try and identify trends, but I didn't want to be driven by quantitative approaches. I wasn't really interested in just gathering stats. I wanted to talk to learners. So I also used qualitative methods. I did focus groups, I did interviews, and I tried to get underneath what the questionnaire data was telling me. Mixed methods. So I want to go through some of the bullet points. They're by no means all the bullet points. As I say, the papers are there. They're downloadable if you're interested. But some of the bullet points, and those bullet points will then take us to what I think it means. But first, to establish digital residence and digital self from the data. British Council study, Jarvis 2013, Thai and Emirati adult students use computers as autonomous learners in less controlled contexts. Most of my questions here are about computers, not so much mobile devices. I realised that I needed to be asking more about mobile devices after the study. But there was widespread evidence that people were using computers outside the classroom as autonomous learners. So in self-access centres and beyond, there was significant evidence of accessing and using English, which were viewed as important as traditional learning resources. So when I asked the students, what kinds of things do you do? They said, oh, we go on Facebook, and some of them said we go on Twitter, we watch YouTube videos, and they said, oh, and we access software programs to practice our English. And I said, well, I started to ask them, which ones are more helpful for learning English? And it was invariably the social media stuff which they said was more helpful, without any explicit conscious focus on language learning. Students, and I was getting the sense, students recognize that they can pick up language through using it, and it's as effective for them as conscious language learning practice. Students were bringing the L2 into their self-access centres, homes. Multitasking was widespread. This is really important. When I first went to teach English in Thailand, this is like, I'm going to date myself. This was a while ago. In the 80s, after Sudan and Kuwait, the communicative approach was huge, yeah? It was mushrooming. We all need to teach in a communicative kind of way. And the biggest obstacle to the communicative approach, if you were working outside a native-speaking country, was students had no chance to use language outside the classroom. That was a constant thing, the problem. So you could do interesting stuff in the classroom, and then they went outside and they never used English. That has completely changed, hasn't it?
Yep.
Providing, and there's a digital divide issue, of course, but providing they have access to mobile devices and the internet, the opportunities for language use are there for all of our students. After the first study, I went back to Thailand, did another sample, but I started thinking, this is really interesting, I need to find out more. And also, Thailand's a wonderful place to go and do some research, of course. And I started to ask a further set of follow-up questions about ownership and mobile devices. I spoke to 120 students. 70% of them had a tablet. 79% of them were online all of the time. They were digital residents. And in terms of the importance of English as a second language when using digital devices, here's some of the things that they said to me. I asked them, how often do you use your first language? How often do you use your second language? 61% of them, as you would expect, said mainly their first language, but some English. 31% said they use their second language with Facebook, with YouTube stuff, with Twitter. They use their second language more than their first language. Now, even allowing for research bias factors and students telling you what you want to hear, I still think that's significant. More significant, every single participant that I spoke to, not one participant said that they only interact socially in Thai. Not one. Which I found quite amazing. They were first year undergraduate students, admittedly at one of the best universities in Thailand. They weren't English majors. They were studying engineering and science-based subjects. But not one single student said that they only interact in Thai. And when I said to them, I don't know if any of you know Thailand, but it's the King Mongkut University of Technology, Thonburi, which is very famous for its self-access centre. It's a kind of model of good practice in the country. So they've got loads of self-study materials in this centre, including lots and lots of digital-based computer programs, CAL programs. And I said to them, what about going to the self-access centre and using all this stuff to practice your English? Go and do a listening comprehension, go and do a grammar exercise. Only 35% of them said that they did that, and they had all had an orientation. So it's not that they didn't know how to do it, they'd all been shown this is the software stuff, this is how you practice your English, and the teachers, of course, we encourage you to do that. They weren't that interested, or not that many were that interested. So I conclude with this on this particular piece. It's not that participants did not know about how to access such exercises, rather it is that they prefer to use English with digital devices over and above using digital devices to learn English. There's a paradigm shift. Computer-assisted language learning, mobile-assisted language learning is really about being, traditionally, is about being a means to an end. We give them a load of stuff on the computer, we put some apps on a mobile phone, they practice their English, and the end is learning English. The paradigm shift is actually, it's the other way round. Students are learning English in order to interact as digitally connected global citizens in English as a lingua franca. Which I think creates a whole load of interesting and exciting opportunities and challenges. Facebook and YouTube, it's fun. Every single participant I spoke to was on Facebook. Every single participant I spoke to had used YouTube, and every single participant had done so in both Thai and in English. Many of them preferring YouTube English stuff to YouTube Thai stuff. And when students didn't get stuff, they were developing appropriate strategies to find solutions. They were trying to understand for GIST, well, is translation software an appropriate strategy? We can have another debate about that another time. I don't know, you'll have your own views. Sometimes it seems to work and sometimes the translation seems to be completely off the wall. But online dictionaries, for example. They'll say, what do you do when you're watching stuff and you're really missing the point? Either they abandon it, or say, oh, it's easier, just go to this dictionary. They were developing their own strategies. And this was stuff I feel teachers were not really tapping into, equipping students to do this kind of stuff. I did a similar study with international students in the UK, and similar similar findings were reported. So, for our students, I'd like to suggest to you, and the argument I want to put, and the argument that my work puts, is that there is a bigger picture than traditional computer-assisted language learning or mobile-assisted language learning. Students wouldn't, and this is just an example of web-based computer-assisted language learning to practice the past tense. Students were doing this, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this has no place whatsoever. There are clearly some interesting things going on within that field, but there is a bigger picture. Students were doing this, but it was more than just this for them. And my argument is that we are in a post-CAL or post-MAL era, which I characterize in my work as mobile-assisted language use. Smartphones for students are more than just smartphones. And they're more than just learning apps. They're used to work, study, rest and play, and all the evidence suggests that students are often doing that in English as an L2. And I think, as a profession, we need to think about that and to recognize that, and I know there's some very good practice going on from the wonderful talks that have been going on today, but you know, our phones are video and audio recorders. They're maps, they're sat-navs, they're internet browsers, they're diaries, they're calculators, newspapers, alarm clocks, music players, TV, radio players, notepads, social media outlets, places to buy and sell, and a load more. And it seems to me that we need to be developing more authenticity in our practice so that we're harnessing all of this and getting them to do useful stuff in English as the target language. And if we do that, we are bringing the idea of authenticity into the language teaching classroom, where we're giving them things that they really need to do in order to equip them to function in English today, tomorrow, and in the future. These things are massive sources for authenticity. Authenticity of text, and I don't just mean written text, I mean audio text, YouTube, as well as traditional written text. And if we think about getting them to do things that they're likely to need to do outside the classroom, then we can argue that that is authenticity of task. It's a real task. It's not a pedagogic task. Getting them to do stuff that they need to do in the real world. And I've argued, it's not on the reference here, that authenticity of text and authenticity of task equates with an authentic learning experience. Something which is not superficial. Mobile assisted language use is a more appropriate framework for developing and investigating practice then. This is a definition that I have in one of my articles on when I first started thinking about this and I first started questioning our traditional paradigms. I may want to kind of look at this again, but for now, let's define Malu as non-native speakers using a variety of mobile devices in order to access and or communicate information on an anywhere, anytime basis and for a range of social and or academic purposes in their L2. I came up with that definition with a colleague that I was working with at the time and a former student of mine in 2013. And it's been widely discussed. I think it works. A lot of people don't like it, which is good. I think it's good to have a debate about these things. One of the criticisms that came back to me was this idea, oh, it's all ivory tower research and what does it mean for practice? And I started to reflect on that and think about what Malu might mean for practice, because a lot of the data that I gathered was from students that I was looking at what they did outside the classroom. And people came back to me and said, what does Malu mean for inside the classroom? Particularly after I published a paper with Stephen Krashen on Malu for comprehensible input as an opportunity to gather meaningful language and comprehend meaningful language. People said, oh, what does that mean for what we do in the classroom? What's the practice? So I started thinking about that, and I've got to something that I would like to share with you in terms of what it means as practice. I should mention at this point, and it's picking up on some of the talks that have been going on today, I think online gaming is probably one of the best examples to illustrate the need for a post-Cal, post-Mal era of Malu. I was in an internet cafe in Thailand attending a conference 3 or 4 years ago when it really struck home to me, and it wasn't the sort of academic papers and the research that got me thinking about this. The hotel I was staying at had an awful internet, so I went to this internet cafe, and it was I don't know, 3 o'clock, 3:15, I'm catching up on my N million emails from colleagues at the university, as one does when you go away. And I'm replying to them all, and then the schools closed, and suddenly the internet cafe was absolutely full. And it was full of Thai teenagers in a fairly small city in the northeast of Thailand. And I'm carrying on working, and they all got online, and I was just hearing, game, goal, shoot, score. And I was thinking, wow, these people were interacting with people all over the world, from Japan, from I don't know if they're actually from China because of all the kind of blocking issues, but from Malaysia, from different parts of the world, in English, using the English language. And there was very little evidence from my previous research to suggest that students play games in order to learn English.
Yeah.
They learn English in order to play games. How do we equip them for that? How do we help our students to behave appropriately and responsibly in an online environment, in a language which is not their first language? It's difficult enough to do in our first language. We get tricked and we get caught by scammers and all that kind of stuff. What about when it's not your first language? Digital literacy is a key solution to that in terms of the bigger picture. So let's just have a look then. This is when I started to reflect about what this means in practice, and I went back to Rod Ellis and Rod Ellis's work. It's been absolutely very influential in the stuff that I do about task-based teaching. We learn through doing. And I wanted to try and map on my ideas, and I worked with Rod Ellis to produce the paper which tries to do that. And let's just compare and contrast two possible lessons. One using a traditional PPP and CAL or MAL, and then an alternative to teach the same thing using task-based approach and mobile-assisted language use. So we need to focus on real-world tasks, and I would argue real-world tasks are much more important than traditional presentation practice and production CAL, MAL type lessons. Here are two examples. Let us assume it's Monday morning and we're working with a lower intermediate group of students. And let us assume that our target is, did I put it on there or did I forget? No, I didn't. Yeah, our target language, past simple tense, for completed actions, a standard sort of syllabus item, okay? We're going to teach the past simple tense for completed actions in the past, lower intermediate group of students, and what better day to do that than Monday? A PPP lesson, and I should say this is best practice PPP lesson because there are, I know PPP itself is contested and some people say the presentation is nothing more than the teacher presents grammar, but this is John Soares from Headway and the stuff that he taught me when I was doing my PPP. So this is good PPP, okay, or best practice PPP if you like. You build a dialogue. You have a little picture, two pictures, John and Jane. You have a little sort of office, it's 9 o'clock, and you concept build. What's his name? John. What's her name? Jane. Where are they in the office? What time is it? Monday. You do all that. What time is it? Where are they? Are they in the office? And you make sure that the class understand the concept. What are they talking about? You have a little bubble about, John, picture of John playing football. Are they talking about the past or the present? And then they, Monday morning, what they talk about the weekend. You establish the concept and you build a dialogue. So, John, listen. What did you do last weekend? What did you do last weekend? What did you do last weekend? Repeat. Okay? And then you build a dialogue. Nothing much. And you show a little picture of, I don't know what Jane did. I went to the cinema. What did you do last weekend? Nothing much, I went to cinema. What did you do last weekend? And you're building your dialogue, you're presenting language. You're bringing your substitution elements. What did you do last weekend? Nothing much, you went to the cinema. And you, and you bring in all that sort of IH stuff. Oh, we got to teach intonation, and you, and we do all that. We drill it. What did you do last weekend? Nothing much, I went to the cinema. And you? I played football. And you practice it, and then you bring the substitution elements, and they're all doing, I played football, I visited about, and you can do your past tense endings, visited, played, so the ud, and the played, and and watched TV, the T endings, and the irregular verbs. You do all that stuff, okay? You present it, you practice it, you drill it, you introduce the substitution elements, and then at the end, you say to students, all right, everyone get up, move around the room, and the production stage, the freer activity, students go around the room and they find out what each other did over the weekend. Familiar to some of you perhaps from the teacher training days? I mean, people tell me that this hasn't changed much. We're going from fluency to accuracy, from teacher-centred, arguably, to learner-centred, arguably. The teacher models fixed language. The lessons go from fluency to accuracy. Where does Cal and Mal fit into this? Well, we do all that, and then the website that I showed you earlier, say, okay, to consolidate that language input, go to this website and fill in all these gaps using your past tense verbs, and we're consolidating it. Or go to the British Council app, the grammar app. You've seen that one? You get like a load free at first, and then you pay. You go to this app, and we want you to consolidate that input with your mobile device. Traditional PPP, traditional Cal now. Does it work? Does this work?
Mm-hmm. It did work.
Did anything work?
We learned that
it did work. I can't pace if I'm going to have to do it by hand, can I? Was my computer frozen?
Karma.
It was meant to be, yes. Tech help, please.
Is it on a paper?
Controls at the bottom of the screen.
No.
I was just doing page down. That's gone.
Just the rub on it and just see that delay it against that one's away.
It's not touch screen. Thank you. Assumptions. Now we're over here now from now on. It assumes that input equals output. We do our dialogue and then the students use it. Largely contested. David Noonan's work, Input in Language Education, does not equate with output. What the teacher teaches is not what the learner learns. Loads of evidence to support that. I don't believe it. Now we've got on this one as well. Why do these things only ever happen to me? Somebody at the back, please. Just both are not working now. Oh, okay. What we have now? Okay, that's good. Don't you just love technology when it works, and don't you just sometimes think a bit of paper's better when it doesn't work? Thank you, Paul. Okay. It assumes input equals output. It's something between behaviouralism and the communicative approach. Behaviouralism at the beginning, language is behaviour. Listen, repeat, and the idea is that something more communicative takes place at the end when they all get up and move around the room to find out they really did. A task-based approach, alternative, would focus on what students do. And let's just sort of illustrate how that might look. This has informed the model that I'm going to give you. Rod Ellis, I mean, there's been, as you all know, I'm sure, there's been a load of work on task-based teaching. Some of it's really user-friendly and some of it's really quite heavy stuff. Yeah? Rod Ellis's book on it is like that. Fortunately for us, he's got it down to 4 bullet points. Okay? So this is a shortcut to write a task-based language teaching. I have to say it is contested as well. This is Ellis's version. There are other versions. Primary focus on meaning. There's some kind of gap. Learners need to use their own linguistic and non-linguistic resources, and there is an outcome, critically, there is an outcome other than the display of language. Language is a means to an end, and there has to be a meaningful end, not just a practice of language. So here's how this might work in terms of Mallow and a task-based approach. So on Friday, you say to the students, okay, over the weekend I want you to get your smartphones out and take some pictures of the things that you do. Really simple task. All of us, well, most of our students have smartphones, so they take pictures of the things that they do. When they come to class on Monday, instead of doing all that presentation and drilling, we set up the task. We say to students, okay, I want you to go around the room, everyone stand up, you go around the room and you show and explain to people what you did over the weekend. Show them some of your pictures. And at the end of the task, I want you to decide who had the most exciting weekend. So there's an outcome which is other than a linguistic outcome. It's not just using language, there has to be some other kind of linguistic outcome. So the students go around the room and there's the whole question of scaffolding. How much language do we teach beforehand and how much do we teach afterwards? If your students are weak, you might put in some past tense verbs and make sure they've got stuff to report. But the strict version of task-based pedagogy is we don't pre-teach. We set up the task and we post-teach, if you like. We teach after they've done the task because that is based on what they're struggling to do. We don't teach what they may already be able to do, which is what most of PPP does. So the students go around the room, they exchange photographs, they talk about their photographs. The teacher goes around listening, making notes. If the errors are individual, less important if there are common errors, like those past tense endings. If people are saying, oh, I watch TV, then they might know past tense endings. There's still a role for focus on form here. The language is not fixed. The students struggle to communicate by exchanging information. It's not necessarily accurate language, but they learn from each other. What you do, what you do weekend, and then somebody else, what did you do? Yeah, what did you do? What did you do weekend? You what weekend? No, you what weekend? What did you do? And they're engaging and struggling. Oh, me, I look. You what? You look. I look. Oh, swimming. Yes, I swimming. No, I go to swimming. No, I went swimming. And those interactions create genuine, meaningful language, and we're using mobile devices in order to do that. The discussion can end in any kind of way. Restaurant. You go, what do you eat? Chinese food. Good. Where is it? Football. Yes, I football. Very good. Liverpool. Very good team. Very good team, Liverpool. Sorry, you're not going to buy me a beer, are you? That's gone, hasn't it? Post-task focuses on form. The teacher's going round. I go to a tie error, I go to, very common. I go to shopping, I go to swimming. So that might be something in that context that works. And the teacher highlights the problems that have taken place in the classroom. Mobile-assisted language use in this case starts in the classroom. It's an authentic kind of thing. People do take pictures on mobile devices and talk about what they did. The conversation goes in any number of directions. Where did you go to eat? What kind of meal did you have? Was it cheap? What football match? Who was a good player? Who was a poor player? Is the manager going to survive? Whatever. You can make a closed group on Facebook where your teacher-based lesson then goes into all kinds. They can post the pictures, they can comment on the pictures, and they're using mobile devices to deliver, or the teacher is using mobile devices to deliver the syllabus in much more meaningful ways than PPP and Cal now. Okay, let's go to some of the, to sort of sum up to some of the bigger picture issues. Because that's a specific example, but I think the idea of digital residence in English as an L2 has a bigger picture. And I think part of the bigger picture is to do with English as a lingua franca. English is really not a second or foreign language anymore. The vast majority of users of the English language in a both digital era and a non-digital era are non-native speakers of the language. And they are owners of the English language as much as native speakers are owners of the English language. And native speakerism and native speaker norms is something I think we have to start challenging. And I, you know, as a white native speaker, middle-class guy, but I'm with the people that are challenging it. English is a lingua franca. When somebody from Japan communicates with somebody from Thailand, communicates with somebody from Belgium, they do so in English as a lingua franca. I think that's part of the story. And I think in terms of Malu and task-based pedagogy, we need to think about how we equip our students through real tasks as defined by those 4 points from Rod Ellis. Meaningful interaction, information gap, primary focus on meaning, some kind of gap. Learners need to use their linguistic and non-linguistic resources, and there has to be an outcome other than the display of language. It's not practicing language for the sake of practicing language. And to do that, I think we need to normalise technology, and I think most of us in this room, I guess I'm preaching to the converted. This was an idea from Stephen Bax. You know, we don't talk about pen-assisted language learning, or overhead projector-assisted language learning, or DVD-assisted language learning, or coursebook-assisted language learning, because these are normalised in our practice. Somehow we still talk about computer or mobile-assisted language learning as if it's kind of over there, something else, because it hasn't been normalised. I think we need to recognise digital environments are a fantastic source for comprehensible input, and that our students go online and pick stuff up all the time in English as a lingua franca, and I've published about that with Krashen. The example lesson that I showed you, the one that I did with Ellis, was kind of a little bit in response to this, because people were saying, oh, it's comprehensible input, it doesn't mean anything for what we do in the classroom. And I'm kind of not with Krashen on that side, because I think it's also about comprehensible output. So it is about getting people to do things. I don't think you just acquire, and then it comes to you. I think we do need to get students to do things, but the things we need to get them to do need to be meaningful, and task-based approaches allow us to do that. But nevertheless, it's a massive source of comprehensible input. And with it comes a whole load of stuff about digital literacy, which has been discussed widely at the event today, and digital footprints. You know, every time we go online, every time we post a picture on Facebook, every time we tweet a picture, that's out there. Even if we delete that tweet, that picture has gone into the public domain. And we need to encourage our students to critically reflect on that. And we need to equip them to be sensible and behave appropriately, and behave efficiently and behave effectively. And we need to be developing tasks that facilitate those kind of things if we are going to equip them to be responsible citizens in the future. You know, I worry when I look at my daughter's, she graduated last year, but I worry when I looked at her postings on her first year at university. You know, I think that's there forever if people want to find it. And we need to get people, not just non-native speakers, but everybody to think about it. But for non-native speakers, it's even more critically because they're doing it in a language which is not their first language. So there's no direct sort of automatic understanding necessarily of linguistic nuances and so on. And we need to recognise that technology as a means to an end. I'm not saying that Cal or Mal is over, I think that it has its place, but I am saying that there's a bigger picture. We need to recognise technology as a means to an end and as an end in itself, with English as an L2 being the means to digital citizenship. Students are learning English in order to engage and interact as globally connected digital citizens. And our practice and our syllabus and the things that we do need, I feel, to better reflect that. And so to our critics, and I guess they're not necessarily here. If you go back to the picture of people on the train that I showed you earlier with the digital devices, and people say, oh yeah, the problem is nobody talks to each other anymore, right? Well, they are talking, they're just not talking to the person next to you. You sat on the train, you know, they're actually chatting, they are engaging, they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're not talking to the person next to you. And our critics say, oh, but nobody really talks anymore. And not like they used to do. Bring back the good old days. When everybody talked to each other. Not on the commuter line belts, ever. So this has got nothing to do with digital technology. In fact, there's more interaction going on there. The references, as I say, the work that I've done, you can download the things from the website. They're all open access. Thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to talking about these ideas with you today, tomorrow, and the rest of the event. Thank you.